Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this December 2nd, 2020 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Now welcome board members and advisors, staff, visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. For our visitors and those listening online, our committee meetings and reports will span 2 days. Tomorrow's meeting will include voting on any items needing action. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Before we begin our work today, I'd like to express my hope that during last week's Thanksgiving holiday, each one of you had an opportunity to rest, recharge, and reflect upon the many things we all have to be grateful for. One of the many things that I'm so grateful for is our shared commitment as a board and as a statewide education team to the importance of education equity for every child and to the education of the whole child and every student, our adopted guiding principles. Maintaining our focus on these principles enables us to meet the academic and non-academic needs of our students, particularly in these extraordinary times. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on our economy in nearly every aspect of our lives, including the education of our children. Students spending many hours alone or tied to a computer screen contribute to anxiety, loneliness, and despair, and have had a negative effect on many of their academic performance. With COVID separating our students from their classmates and caring adults in our schools, there's an even greater need to ensure students feel safe and have the supports needed, whether attending in person or through remote instruction. Last week, we experienced a shooting in one of our schools in Hendersonville. Thankfully, there were no fatalities, but that is an indication of the stress our students are feeling, and addressing the needs of the whole child are critical to ensuring that students feel protected and that schools are truly safe for our students to attend. Formerly, since our last meeting, we tragically lost 2 employees in our public schools due to COVID-19. One, a middle school teacher in Cumberland County Public Schools, and the other, an art teacher in a public charter school in Cumberland County. Our hearts are broken for their families and students of these wonderful educators as we extend our condolences to their families and their school communities. On the whole, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on our students. Some have chosen to characterize our education system as, quote, broken, or, quote, as a disaster. I completely disagree with this characterization. The only disaster is the pandemic itself. In fact, the perseverance, resolve, and acts of kindness of our students and their families throughout this ordeal are shining examples of the best of the spirit of North Carolina. Moreover, the selfless dedication, creativity, and courage of our teachers, teacher assistants, counselors, child nutrition and custodial staff, bus drivers, principals, superintendents, and many others across our state, including the DPI staff, since March 14th, 2020, is truly remarkable. And every North Carolinian, whether we have a child in a public school or not, owes a huge debt to our educators. They have earned our respect, our admiration, and our gratitude. And it will take every one of our educators and all of our support over many years to provide the education recovery that our students need to overcome this pandemic. It will take our time, our talents, our dedication, and our resources in greater quantities and organized in a more efficient and effective manner for many years to turn this challenge into our finest hour. Working with our Superintendent-Elect, EPI, and educators and students across our state, we will transform our education system to recover from this pandemic, to emerge stronger, to better serve all of North Carolina students for decades to come. Our children's future and our future as a state depends upon our resolve to let nothing stand in the way of our children's education. So as we prepare for the winter break holidays, please be mindful of ensuring that we follow the 3 W's, wearing a mask, washing our hands, and waiting 6 feet apart in order to beat this virus down. Short of a vaccine, these are the most effective measures to protect ourselves, to care for our neighbors, and to reopen our schools. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. Included in the motion to approve the agenda is moving the presentation from Superintendent-Elect Captain Truitt under my chairman's report for tomorrow to today, following the Strategic Planning Committee report. And so I ask if there are any other additional requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion to approve this December 2nd, 2020 agenda.
So moved. This is Mrs. Cannons.
Motion by Ms. Cannons. Is there a second?
Second by Wendell.
Second by Mr. Hall. Now I ask Dr. Townsend Smith to call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Treasurer Falwell? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. We'll now proceed to today's committee reports, and I note to committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed via roll call vote tomorrow. I now recognize Mr. James Ford, Chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. Mr. Ford.
Thank you so much, and good morning, Mr. Chair, as well as my other board members and colleagues. Grateful to be able to present this Strategic Planning Committee report. As mentioned, I'm James Ford, joined alongside my illustrious Vice Chair, Ms. Jill Camnitz. Today we'll begin by having a discussion to continue to explore the options to ensure a prepared and qualified educated classroom. This presentation will begin with none other than our very own North Carolina Teacher of the Year, Ms. Maureen Stover, and we'll hear additional commentary and insights from Dr. Tom Tomberlin. And so without further ado, Ms. Stover.
Mr. Chairman, this is Treasurer Falwell. I had to step out for a moment and chairing another meeting, but just wanted to count me as present. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer. Welcome back. Mr. Ford?
Mr. Ford?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Ford, this is Ms. Camnitz. Would you mind if I just gave a little bit of background before we turn to Ms. Stover and Dr. Tomberlin on this first section of our issues session?
Of course.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The issue session today relates directly to Goal 3 of our strategic plan, which is to increase educator preparedness to meet the needs of every student. I'd like to give a little background on these first 2 presentations. Going back 2 years ago, the Southern Regional Education Board formed a group called the North Carolina Human Capital Roundtable. which was funded by the Belk and the Gates Foundations. The mission of this group was to convene key agencies and shareholders to collaborate and take action to increase the quality, quantity, and diversity of teacher candidates and prepare them to be licensed, hired, supported, and retained as highly effective educators in North Carolina schools. At the table were representatives of the UNC system, North Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities, North Carolina Community Colleges, the Governor's Office, the State Board, DPI, Pepsi, our North Carolina Teacher and Principals of the Year, and Best NC. The group started meeting 2 years ago and quickly focused on clarifying and improving standards for entry into the teaching profession. Over 2 years, that goal broadened into a complete rethinking of licensure, teaching roles, pay structures, and measures of effectiveness. All of us on the roundtable look forward to sharing our proposal with the board in January. In preparation for that discussion today, Ms. Stover and Dr. Tomberlin are going, and the Drive Task Force are going to help us explore some of the issues which were the impetus for the group's work. So thank you for that point of clarification, Mr. Ford, and Ms. Stover, we turn to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Ford and Ms. Kamnitz, and good morning, Chairman Davis and the members and advisors of the North Carolina State Board of Education. As the 2020 Burroughs Wellcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year, an advisor to our Board of Education, and a practicing high school teacher, it is my honor to talk with you today about my journey to becoming a fully licensed teacher in North Carolina. Next slide, please. As we explore my path into teaching in North Carolina, you will learn that I had a few bumps in the road. However, as I speak to you today, I ask you to remember that we have 1.5 million students enrolled in our North Carolina public schools, and each of these kids deserves teachers who are trained and qualified to meet their diverse learning needs. The obstacles I encountered helped to ensure that I was a qualified teacher and provided an opportunity from my local school district and the Department of Public Instruction to certify that I could meet the needs of my kids and provide effective instruction. I do think it is important that we consider the obstacles I face, though, because I know there are other prospective teachers who have considered teaching in North Carolina and decided not to because of the obstacles they have faced during the licensure process. As a teacher, a parent, and a community member, I know that our high-quality public education is paramount to our state's success, and today I offer you my perspective on transferring my teaching certificate to North Carolina so we can identify some areas where we can improve our out-of-state teacher recruitment process. Next slide, please. My dad describes me to his friends as his child who loves school. I think that's the perfect way to describe me. I love going to school and I love teaching school. Education is truly my calling. I show you my credentials not to brag, but rather to demonstrate the knowledge base that many teachers have earned. As teachers, we are required to earn continuing education credits to renew our certificates, but many teachers are motivated to engage in professional development beyond the minimum requirements to improve their teaching practice. When I moved to North Carolina, I was a fully licensed teacher in Florida in biology 6 through 12 and elementary education K through 6. I had 2 years experience teaching at the high school level and 1 year at the elementary level. Because I was a military spouse and did not need health insurance, my school district in Florida hired me as a teacher of record, but coded me as a long-term sub. I still made the same amount of money. I was still a teacher of record, but this saved the school district thousands of dollars a year in unnecessary health insurance costs. When my husband got orders to California, I accepted a position at the National Science Teaching Association and worked as a licensed teacher developing standards-aligned educational support materials. When we moved to North Carolina, my Florida certificate was expiring, so I began the process to transfer my license here. I looked at the DPI website, followed the instructions to transfer my certificate, and mailed in my paperwork along with my check. 6 months later, when my check had not cleared and was about to expire, I called DPI to check on the progress of my license. After several phone calls, I finally learned that my application had been sitting on someone's desk unopened. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. They did process my license, but when it arrived in the mail, I was surprised to learn that I had been licensed as an initially licensed teacher on an SP1 license. However, the license department did explain that since I had been hired as a long-term sub in Florida, that none of my previous teaching experience would be credited. You will also notice that none of my postgraduate education is credited on my license. I have submitted my transcripts, however, was told that my out-of-state degree from Adams State University, which is an accredited university and qualified as a teacher preparation program in Colorado, was not qualified for credit in North Carolina. And the lady who I spoke with at Licensure told me that she did not know what Columbia University was, and so she did not think that that would count either. Although WGUNC is an approved EPP in North Carolina, you will also notice that this degree is not reflected on my license. Next slide, please. I was hired in February 2016 to fill an emergency vacancy in Cumberland County. I was not placed into the BT program, and I thought that this was because I had completed 3 years of teaching in Florida. But when I was moved to a middle school for a full year of teaching in 2016-17, I was placed in as a BT1. As an initially licensed teacher, remember I did have 3 years of teaching experience and 6 years of education-related work experience. I entered the BT program and started my journey to a continuing North Carolina educator's license. At times it was tedious and it required an immense amount of paperwork, but these kids, next slide, please. At times it was tedious and it required an immense amount of paperwork, but these kids are why I'm a teacher, and these kids are why I didn't mind the extra work. However, there are some teachers who would have minded the extra work and possibly would have decided not to teach. My calling is to teach these kids, and if it meant a little bit of extra work on my end to become a fully licensed teacher in North Carolina, I knew that it was totally worth it. Next slide, please. My experience does raise some concerns about how we transfer certificates from out-of-state teachers into North Carolina. I was very fortunate that my husband had a full-time job and we did not rely on my salary to meet our family's basic needs. This gave me some extra time to work patiently for several months with DPI to finally get my certificate to teach in North Carolina. If my family had required my salary immediately upon moving to North Carolina for our daily needs, I would not be a teacher in North Carolina today. Also, I understand that I will not be compensated for my advanced degrees. However, I do think that it is important that North Carolina at least acknowledges the advanced degrees of teachers on our licenses. If someone were to pull my license right now, it would appear that I've only earned an undergraduate degree. But with 2 postgraduate certificates and 2 master's degrees, that is simply not the case. I think it would also be helpful to have clear information for out-of-state educators who are seeking to transfer their licenses to North Carolina. The information on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot from DPI's website. When I began the process to transfer my certificate, I read similar information. However, my Florida license was not transferred. Instead, my NC license was issued based on my undergraduate degree work, and North Carolina completely dropped my elementary license. Next slide, please. While the process was cumbersome at times, when I started my license transfer process, I was not working in a North Carolina school. Once I was hired in a North Carolina school, it became much easier for me to navigate the challenges because my principal, Maria Pierce Ford, and my superintendent, Dr. Marvin Conley Jr., supported me and guided me through the challenges with licensure. The BT program provided opportunities for me to reflect on my teaching practice and to learn from an outstanding retired educator, Dr. Carolyn Winfrey. It also provided me with an extensive understanding of the BT program, which enabled me to be a more effective mentor teacher and a more effective cooperating teacher for our beginning teachers and pre-service teachers. Next slide, please. While I did run into obstacles earning my continuing educator's license in North Carolina, in the end, I would go back and do it all again in a heartbeat. I love teaching here. I love my students, my colleagues, and all of the amazing people who I've met on this journey. While I do think there are some places where we can streamline the transfer process, in the end, North Carolina's system is designed to ensure our students have outstanding teachers, and I am proud to be a North Carolina educator. Thank you.
Board members, I did want to offer, and you can feel free to correct me if you think or just think that it's better to wait till later. But if you all had any questions of Maureen at this exact moment, Maureen, would you be willing to entertain some of those?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay, hearing none.
Mr.
sorry.
Ford, I will just, this is Mrs. Candace, will just make a comment to Ms. Stover. I mean, I'm so grateful that you persisted, because obviously you are exactly what we dream about and what parents dream about, the kind of teacher that parents dream about. And so it just reconfirms in my mind that we have got to fix these problems, because we're losing talented teachers every day.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. There are many teachers in classrooms who are very similar to me. And I think that, I'm very fortunate to have been recognized for my love of education and being in the position I'm in. And I'm happy that I have an opportunity to speak with everyone today about some of those challenges that I faced. But I do agree, I know that we are maybe losing out on some teachers who would be similar to me, who would really have that passion and want to be in a classroom and love coming to school every day, simply because they're running into some problems with licensure. And, especially I noticed that someone in the chat had said that this is especially a concern for military spouses. And that's definitely true. There are many military spouses who are teachers who are coming into North Carolina with credentials and degrees from other states. And then it becomes an issue because they can't get their license transferred here fast enough. And so then they're like, well, we're moving again anyway in 18 months. I'm not even going to bother. And so I think we do miss out on a lot of extraordinary teachers who would really add to our schools and add to our communities, simply because they run into some difficulty trying to transfer their license.
Mr. Ford, this is Olivia. I have a quick question.
Dr. Oxendine, please proceed.
And thank you, Ms. Stover, for bringing your experience to the attention of the state board. My question has to do with, after it was discovered that your application was residing on a desk for about 6 months. I don't know how you found out, but obviously you did. How soon thereafter was the process completed?
It took about 2 months after they found my certificate or after they found my paperwork. And what happened was I checked the checkbook constantly because I'm old and I still balance my checkbook. And so when I noticed the check hadn't cleared, I knew it had to clear within 180 days. Otherwise, they could no longer cash it. So when I was about 170 days out, I called DPI to find out the status, to see if they needed something else or what was going on. They initially told me that they had never received my paperwork, but I had sent it express mail. And so I had the signature. So I said, no, you received it on whatever day. And this person signed for it. And sure enough, they called me back about 20 minutes later and said that my paperwork was sitting in the envelope still unopened on that person's desk. And so at that point, they did begin the process, but it still took about 2 months before I received my license in the mail from DPI from that point.
Okay, thank you very much. And the issue you're raising is certainly an important issue. It isn't necessarily a policy issue, but it's an operational, internal issue. And along with other strategies and ideas to improve the licensure of the process of licensing teachers, whether in state or out of state, in North Carolina, certainly needs to address some of the operational issues. And this isn't to be disparaging against the staff, because I know they work yeoman level work. Just a point that I wanted to raise, Mr. Ford. And thank you again, Ms. Stover, for your dedication to the Tar Heel kids.
Absolutely. And I would like also to say, to follow up with what Dr. Oxendine said, all of the experiences that I've had with licensure, with the exception of that envelope getting lost, have been extraordinary. They're outstanding. They answer questions. They respond to emails right away. So I don't want it to seem that it was a weird thing that happened that just meant that my license sat on someone's desk because it was misplaced. And so I do not think that reflects on our licensure department as a whole by any means.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ford.
My pleasure, Dr. Oxendine. Any other questions? colleagues? Hearing none, let me just say, Ms. Stover, thank you so much for humanizing this process and exposing both the positives as well as some of the flaws. A question for us to entertain before I hand it over to Dr. Tomlin, however, is for every moreover, we have to consider how many other excellent, outstanding, and noteworthy teachers weren't able to persist or weren't able to navigate some of the loopholes of that system. And I would just also like to add that as another out-of-state teacher who was licensed in Illinois and then came here, you can include my name in the number of folks who ran into problems as well and didn't have certain certifications and endorsements acknowledged. And so here to discuss and return and refresh our memories to that process of licensure for out-of-state teachers is none other than Dr. Tom Tomlin. So Dr. Tomlin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And thank you, board members, for allowing me this opportunity to discuss the licensure process and policies related to out-of-state teachers. So I do want to recognize and give some context here to the importance of out-of-state teachers to the North Carolina educator pipeline. So in the 1920 school year, there were approximately 7,000 new teachers that came to be employed in North Carolina. And of those, about a quarter were teachers who came from another state. So for the current year, of course, with the pandemic, the number of new teachers is considerably lower this year, around 4,700, but still in excess of one quarter of those teachers did come to us from another state. So getting these teachers licensed in North Carolina, getting them employed and helping support them is a critical piece of our educator pipeline in the state. So just to refresh your memory, for many of you on the board, these flow charts are maybe cause a little trauma going back a couple of years. The complexity of our licensure process, especially for out-of-state teachers, is daunting. I have full recognition of that. But this complexity is born out of the policy requirements that we have to hold teachers to in order to license them in North Carolina. In general, teachers coming to us from out of state are divided into two major groups, those with fewer than 3 years of experience and those with an excess of 3 or more years of experience. For those candidates that have less than 3 years of experience, we do hold them to testing unless they come to us with a comparable test. And I'll talk more about the comparability of our test later. And then we have specific requirements related to elementary and ECGC. For those teachers, there has to be specific tests and subtests in order for those teachers to qualify for the license and for us to basically convert their out-of-state license to a North Carolina license. For those teachers who have greater than 3 years of experience, again, we look at several indicators to determine whether we can grant them a North Carolina license. They have to have, of course, exams, licensure exams in place. Or for those teachers with greater than 3 years of experience, we will accept national board certification in lieu of licensure exams. But in all cases, by statute, if the out-of-state teacher does not bring evidence of effectiveness, then we are prevented from issuing a CPL for those teachers. We can only issue an IPL. And for elementary and ECGC, there is a difference that we do not accept national board licensing for those teachers. They have to have a licensure exam, a comparable licensure exam with a subtest of math and reading. And for those teachers, even with greater than 3 years of experience, who do not have those requirements, we would have them impose testing on those teachers from out of state. So when we think about out-of-state teachers, there are a list of things that we have to consider about their bringing their license or licensing them in North Carolina. And I'm going to go over these 6 high-level aspects with you really quickly, just to explain what the issues are and how some of these can present obstacles and frustration for our teachers coming from out of state. First, the Educator prep programs. So North Carolina does recognize other states' EPPs as providing adequate preparation. When we refer to reciprocity with licensure, this is what we mean. We do not mean the licenses are reciprocal. We mean that the preparation, that another state's preparation program, we have reciprocity with North Carolina, that we accept that as adequate preparation in North Carolina. Licensure will accept out-of-state preparation for a candidate if that preparation program leads to licensure in the state of origin. So if I went to the University of Iowa and their ed prep program qualified me for an Iowa license, then North Carolina would recognize that preparation as meeting our standards. Out-of-state licensure exams are recognized by North Carolina with some exception, and this goes to the comparability issue. In general, a recent policy passed by the State Board of Education indicates that we will recognize an out-of-state licensure exam if it's in the same content area as the license being applied for in North Carolina, and if it meets the requirements of that state for licensure at that time. So if I took, I'm making up a test here, if I took Praxis 1100 in my state and that qualified, and my score qualified me for a license, North Carolina, and you're coming to North Carolina seeking the same content area, we would recognize that license as being a valid exam and would not impose further testing requirements. Where this gets a little tricky is if it's elementary, if this is an elementary application, then of course there has to be a clear passing subtest of math and reading. You can't have a general elementary test with no subtest. We would not view that as comparable, and we would hold the candidate to either foundations of reading courses and math courses, or taking the North Carolina version of the Pearson or the Praxis. The other issue here is if the out-of-state test is the exact same test as the North Carolina test, then North Carolina holds the candidate to North Carolina's passing score. So if this is middle school math, and if both states use Praxis 1100, let's say, then the candidate would have to meet North Carolina's cut score on that same test in order to be issued the license, even if the other state's passing score was lower, and that's a distinction that was made in policy. So the out-of-state license, we do accept other states' licenses as the basis for issuing a North Carolina license. But the candidate must have effectiveness data in order to be granted a continuing professional license. The North Carolina testing requirements are in effect if the candidate does not have a comparable test from another state. And North Carolina will view three or more years of certified teaching in another state as the critical trigger for whether there is a BTSP requirement. So we don't hold teachers to having participated in a BTS in another state, but if they come to us with 3 or more years of certified teaching, then we will grant, we will waive the BTS requirement even if we issue an IPL. The level of license, the general statute requires out-of-state teachers to provide effectiveness data. So if that does not exist, we cannot grant a CPL for any teacher coming out of state, regardless of the years of experience. Experienced teachers who are issued an IPL, though, are not required to complete a BTSP program. The requirements to convert to an SCPL, if the teacher, beginning teacher support is required, if it's determined that the teacher has fewer than 3 years of certified teaching. We will accumulate those years across jurisdictions. So this is especially important for our military service members and their spouses. If you've got 6 months in one state and 6 months in another, we will combine those and grant cumulative years of experience. Licensure exams, including the pedagogy requirement, if those comparable exams do not exist, were not taken at some previous point. And national boards is allowed if the greater than 3 years of experience exists. And finally, the issue of bachelor's or master's licenses. So out-of-state teachers may be issued an A, a bachelor's, an M, a master's, or a D level license. The graduate degrees, however, must align with the license area for the license to be designated as an M or a D. And as Ms. Stover pointed out, the license level does not necessarily relate to salary. That is a separate issue. There are statutory requirements about when the master's or the doctoral program had to be initiated in order for a candidate to qualify for advanced pay. So the years of experience in general, certified teaching experience is verified by the employer and credited on a one-to-one basis for a North Carolina salary position. So if you had 12 years in Florida and those were all certified by Florida as certified teaching experience, we would award those on a one-to-one basis to the North Carolina license. Partial years can be combined. And again, as I stated before, the graduate work for getting master's pay or doctoral level pay, the graduate work had to have commenced on or before August 1st, 2013 to qualify for advanced pay. Non-teaching work experience prior to earning a BA may be awarded at a 2-to-1 ratio. So every 2 years of non-teaching work experience before the candidate earned a BA degree would be awarded if it's relevant to the licensure area. Any non-teaching work experience earned after the conferral of a bachelor's degree would be awarded on a one-to-one basis. These years of experience, however, are non-transferable. So this is important in the case of a license where a teacher is maybe is a science license, has a science license and let's say a CTE license. They may get non-teaching work experience for the CTE license, but they couldn't transfer those years of experience over to the science license. So one of the main issues that I deal with out-of-state teachers and their frustration around the licensure process is the licensure office adheres to the policy and does not exercise judgment in unusual or extenuating circumstances. And I tried to find a corollary to this out in the, in the quote unquote real world. And the best I could find is monetary policy. Now, I'm not an expert on monetary policy, but the way I understand there's two schools of thought or two driving forces in monetary policy. You have discretionary versus rule-based. In rule-based, you have a set of rules and policies that trigger certain actions in monetary policy if those conditions are met. In discretionary, the experts look at the prevailing trends or the context of the world in order to make judgment-based decisions on how monetary policy should go. Now, there are pros and cons to each of these approaches. So the rule-based approach does provide consistency and uniform application for all situations versus a situational application of policy. So to kind of explain further where we are with this, if the great late Stephen Hawking decided he wanted to teach physics in North Carolina, in a North Carolina high school, we would gladly welcome him. But in order to license Dr. Hawking, he would have to go through an educator prep program. We could not recognize the fact that he was the leading expert in physics in the on the planet, we would still require him to adhere to our policies in order to be licensed in North Carolina. So some important considerations for this. Out-of-state teachers are a critical component of the teacher pipeline in North Carolina. Removing policy obstacles to North Carolina licensure could help keep this pathway robust and continuing to bring teachers to the state. Ease of obtaining licensure, however, has to be balanced with ensuring consistent standards for all licensees. The downside to this is making it overly simplistic for the 25% that are contributing to the pipeline, would alienate the 75% who are seeking North Carolina pathway to licensure. And if that process is overly burdensome compared to the out-of-state process, it can cause this problem. And finally, all licensed teachers have the potential to become a future teacher of the year. We need to treat them all as if they are going to be our next teacher of the year. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Ford, and I'm happy to answer questions if any of the board members have any.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. Board, you may recall this is not our first time having Dr. Tomberlin attempting to explain this to us, but it is a lot. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin, for the crash course. If there are any questions, points of clarification that are needed, now would be the time to ask them.
Mr. Ford, this is Olivia.
Dr. Axenbaum.
Dr. Tomberlin, I can't tell you how much I enjoy seeing your collection of frames on how to become licensed in North Carolina, especially if you're out of state. It always triggers a whole new batch of questions for me. So let me begin with this one. This is kind of a weedish question, but I can't recall the frame number, but it had to do with if you have a graduate degree, master's or a doctoral level, in order to get paid, correct me if I'm wrong, in order to be paid on that degree, it must align with your initial license, your area of licensure. Is that correct?
So this is a great question. So we have what's called the basis license, and then you can add other areas to that. It doesn't have, the master's degree would not have to align with the basis license, but it could only apply to a license area for which it is related. So if I had both, if I came in with a basis license of general science and then I added chemistry, and I have a master's in chemistry, that's probably a poor example. I come in with science and I add math, and I get and I have a master's in mathematics. The M-level license would apply to the mathematics license, not the science license.
Okay, so if an individual has an advanced degree, let's say in school administration, a master's in school administration, or a doctoral degree, let's say in school counseling, and the base license is in high school English, nothing is aligned to that base license for salary purposes?
That is correct. If the employee is operating as a high school, let's say a high school English teacher, then master's pay would not be applicable to that role.
Okay, thank you. And I think that resonates back to the removal of the master's pay, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. My other question, if I may, Mr. Ford.
Please.
Dr. Tomberlin, if I were to ask you to list the removal of some barriers to make the process of licensing out-of-state teachers less onerous, is that possible? I mean, would we run into legislative problems, statutory problems?
So I think the nexus of statute and policy, does serve to create this rather complex process for moving, especially out of state teachers through the system and getting them licensed. There's certainly, one of the possible approaches to reducing the complexity is to expand the idea of what is acceptable for establishing licensure. I would think that multiple approaches to this is much more is likely to free up some movement for these teachers coming from out of state, different ways that they could demonstrate their preparation and their qualifications for holding a North Carolina license could often alleviate some of the feeling of being boxed in and not having exactly the right form or the right degree or the right test. That would offer some flexibility while maintaining the rigor. But whatever we accepted for out-of-state teachers, I would assume we would want to allow that similar pathway for those who are prepared in North Carolina. And that is my chief concern here, is keeping the equity in the process for both out-of-state and in-state candidates.
Right. Thank you. That last point was a very important point. Thank you so much for your responses. And thank you, Mr. Ford.
Absolutely, Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Jackson, I believe you had would like to add?
Good morning, and thank you. I guess I would ask that, I guess I operate from a very simple truism, and that is, if you keep hitting the same wall, you've got to at some point stop blaming the wall. This has been an age-old challenge for us, and I could share almost the same story that Maureen shared about, and I did my initial licensure here in North Carolina, left and went to Virginia and came back and had a problem transferring my license back to North Carolina. So there's some definite systemic barriers there and challenges that probably would be worthwhile. I would ask that maybe two things be considered. And one is that, and I put it in the chat, are there ways that we might be able to look at some level of designing functional interstate compacts? I'm not talking about this notion of we recognize programs. I'm talking about real functional interstate compacts where if you get a license in the state, we respect that enough that we immediately transfer that license over and you're able to teach in our school. That may be a legislative issue. I'm sure it is. And then the other piece is, would it not make sense to potentially incentivize a front-end impact where we might be able to work with our, I'm sorry.
You're getting a lot of feedback here.
Yeah.
So apologies. We'll just hold on. Okay, Dr. Jackson, I think you may be good now.
Okay, and so the second one might be, would it not make some sense, and I would say the interstate compacts, they're working right now in the legal field where you can take a licensure, you can take our exam for multiple states at the front end. And so I would say, why not incentivize that in a regional capacity, or even for North Carolina, that we even look at those states around us and really work to look at a way where we might be able to work with those colleges of education to build a system that would allow those initial teachers or even those interested in coming to North Carolina at some point to take those exams that we know we are different, or build some capacity for them to do that and incentivize that so that we have a ready pool or a ready pathway for those who may need to cross state lines at different times. And that may be an incentive for military spouses, maybe an incentive for those who live in border counties. As a superintendent of a school district that's 16 miles from the Virginia line, this is a huge challenge for us. We lose teachers, we gain some as well, but it's always the licensure issue that clogs that pipeline for us and that creates the challenge for getting them in seamlessly. So whatever we can do to begin the process of either streamlining this process, and it has to be far more efficient. No one wants to sacrifice quality, but I believe that we can have both of them. We can have quality and we can have efficiency as well, and that's user friendly and employee friendly as they try to make those transitions. It's difficult enough to have to move from state to state, but when work is required and we know we need the workforce, they want to work. I believe that there are enough smart people that can put this together to really find a way to either put those licenses together and recognize them, or incentivize a process where people can, in fact, on the front end say, I may end up teaching in North Carolina. And then we have a ready pool of people who can go back and forth across these lines without all of the hills and valleys that are in place. So I would ask that those things might be considered, and I'm more than willing to even help work on that as a solution.
Excellent comments, questions, and ideas, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Tomlin, I don't know if you wanted to questioner. You had a reaction to that, or and if not, that's fine.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ford. I was muted. I thought I was contributing to the feedback problem. So there are a couple of things that I do want to address in there. Those are excellent suggestions, Dr. Jackson, and I think this question of interstate agreements has come up before. The challenge for us is the constant monitoring of other states in the compact, any changes that they might make to their licensure process that we would have to respond to. And I'm certainly not an attorney in how those agreements would be constructed, but I think this was initially raised to the board a number of years ago, and that the decision was that we can't control the changes that might exist outside of North Carolina, which could impact those agreements that we have, and if they were to lower or raise their standards after the compact was entered into. But it's certainly a good suggestion, and we are cognizant of the facility to which a teacher from out of state can come in is probably costing us a number of teachers who may have other options elsewhere that have more lenient reciprocity rules.
Thank you, Dr. Tomlin. And for the sake of time, we're going to take just a couple of more questions. Mr. Bristow Smith, I know you had one queued up.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And this is more a comment than a question. Some of you on the board know that my wife is an English department chair at Nash Community College. And much of our discussion at home is about the wonderful teachers that we hire into our respective organizations. Her department at Nash Community College, my school at Edgecombe Early College. Someone like Maureen, who would be coming to the job market with multiple master's degrees and multiple certifications, would be hired in a heartbeat by the community college systems with no licensure issues at all. My wife, and now if Maureen were an English person, not a science person, Maureen would be plucked out of the talent pool and offered a position with none of the barriers that she described to us. And so I share that only as a point of juxtaposition that when we have out-of-state applicants who are highly qualified in their content areas with prior experience or with advanced degrees, the community college system is already poised to provide them a streamlined employment path. Whereas the licensure process that Maureen described seems almost fraught with opportunities for her to not actually get employed in North Carolina. So I just wanted to add that into our dialogue that there is fierce competition for talent in both the community college system and the public school system. And right now, our internal barriers are getting in the way of people like Maureen, getting plucked up to teach our kids. And so, like, we are so fortunate that she persevered, but I'm not sure that the system was set up for that. So, thank you, Mr. Ford.
No, thank you, Mr. Bristow Smith, for that insightful commentary and illustrating how that plays out. Mr. Chair, I know you had a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And Dr. Tomberlin, I want to thank you for your just real patient and tireless effort on this topic that keeps coming back to us. I really appreciate you and the challenges that our licensure team faces. But I really feel a sense of urgency to do something immediately. And so I seek your advice on the last slide in your presentation, removing policy obstacles. I'd ask if you and your team, working with Ford and Ms. Cammons, could come back and whoever the other appropriate members of the board are, come back to this group in January with 3 to 4 recommendations on policy obstacles that this board can take action on in order to have a positive effect on this issue before the beginning of the next school year. If you could do that, I would be greatly appreciated.
We will do so.
Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Absolutely. And on behalf of myself and Ms. Cammons, I know we'll be happy to help achieve that goal as well, Mr. Chair. And thank you again to Dr. Tomberlin for the presentation and answering your questions. Transitioning to the next part of our issue session, did want to take the initiative, introduce the speaker for today, who is none other than Dr. Anthony Graham, who is the chairperson of the Drive Task Force, which you all should be familiar with by now, and also the provost at Winston-Salem State University. And he will be bringing us, giving us a chance to look at the culmination of the work that has been going on for the better part of the last year, and provide some recommendations germane to most specifically our strategic planning goals that we've identified as part of our plan. And so with that in mind, I welcome you, Dr. Graham, and thank you for your leadership. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I appreciate it. And thank you to the Board of Education for allowing me this opportunity to share with you the work of the Drive Task Force. The Drive Task Force, as you are aware, commissioned by Governor Cooper, it focuses on how we go about developing a representative and inclusive vision for education in the state of North Carolina. So there are 3 objectives that I want to achieve today in the conversation that I have with you. First, I want to set the stage and really engage in discourse about teacher diversity in the state of North Carolina and nationally, sharing with you data that I'm fairly certain you're familiar with, but I still want to do some level setting here to make sure that we're all on the same page. Then I want to provide you a very brief overview of the Drive Task Force, who we are, what we've been commissioned to do, the timeline in which we've been doing this work, and what comes next, if you will. And finally, I want to leave you with a general overview of the recommendations from the Drive Task Force. I will say to you up front that I will not share with you today the specific recommendations because as a task force, we have not voted on these as of yet. We will do so next Monday, December the 7th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at that point, we will make those recommendations public to everyone. So let me begin by doing some level setting and talking about teacher diversity in the state of North Carolina and nationally. As many of you know, in the state of North Carolina, there is an incongruence between our K-12 teacher workforce and our K-12 student demography. When you look at our data on the next slide, relative to our teacher workforce, nearly 80% of our K-12 classroom teachers are white, whereas our student population is increasingly racially and ethnically diverse. And we continue to see our student population grow in that direction. This is fairly consistent with what we see nationally. So North Carolina is not an outlier, as we know. But we are concerned about the incongruence between the representation of our students of color and our teachers of color. When we start thinking about the demographics of our educator preparation programs, what we know is help is not on the way from a racial diversity standpoint. If you look at our educator preparation programs at our four-year institutions of higher education in the state of North Carolina, public and private, 81% of our students in our traditional ed prep programs are white. We have greater diversity in our alternative pathways, but even there, the great share, the largest share of the population are white students. Some might say, well, the Teaching Fellows program could serve as a solution, but I would say in its current configuration, that is not true. During the 18-19 year, we awarded 133 Teaching Fellows, and 81% of those recipients are white. So again, the Teaching Fellows program at present is essentially perpetuating the exact conditions that we see in our K-12 teacher workforce. When we look at the data from a national level, it was a research study conducted by the Condition of Future Educators. This is back in 2015. Looking at the perceptions of teaching as a career by high school students who were taking the ACT exam. In 2015, there were 1.9 million students who took the ACT and completed this particular survey. Less than 5% of those students expressed an interest in the teaching profession at all. And of that 5%, 70% of the students who expressed interest were white. So there's something fundamentally at the core of the perception of the teaching profession and something fundamentally inherent in the work that we do in this space that continues this perpetual outcome of more white teachers in the classroom than teachers of color. The question becomes, what is or what are those issues? The other thing that we know from research data nationally is that the K-12 teacher workforce literally is an inherited profession. What we know from research that's been conducted, children of teachers are more than twice as likely to become teachers. And when you begin to look at who our teachers are and who those individuals are who are more than likely to become teachers, what we know for sure is that daughters of Black and Hispanic teachers are more likely to become teachers, and sons and daughters of white teachers are more likely to become teachers. This does not hold true, however, for sons of Black teachers. The other thing that's problematic, and we're quite familiar with this, is the mass exodus of teachers of color. We continue to see teachers of color leave the classroom at an alarming rate, especially Black male teachers. When we look at our teachers of color compared to our white teachers, annually we see a 24% higher exodus per year than white teachers. When we delve deeper and ask the questions why, what we hear from our teachers of color from a qualitative standpoint, they express oftentimes feeling devalued. They express that they are oftentimes silenced. And that's a scary word for someone to say, I feel silenced. They do not feel supported by their administrators, by and large, who are oftentimes white as well. They are questioned pedagogically, they're questioned professionally, and they experience racial microaggressions. All of these things contribute to our teachers of color leaving the classroom at very high rates. This is problematic because we know, based on the research over the last decade and a half, that teachers of color have a significant impact on the learning outcomes of all K-12 students. When we look at our research data, teachers of color have positive impacts on the reading scores, the math scores of K-12 students. And we often attribute this to teachers of color who are more willing to use culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally sustaining practices in their classroom, which affirm the student identity. And this is just not for students of color, but it affirms the identity of all students, primarily because culturally relevant pedagogy focuses on three tenets: academic excellence, cultural competence, and critical consciousness. Being able to push students toward academic achievement while ensuring that they're more competent about the cultural world around them, and then connecting what they're learning to the real world so that they're uplifting society. These tenets are good for all students, not just students of color. We also know that our Black students are more likely to express interest in college when they're taught by teachers of color. And we also know that Black students are less likely to drop out of school when they're taught by at least one Black teacher. So given that entire context, that sets us up for the work of the Drive Task Force and what this group has been commissioned to do. The purpose of the Drive Task Force, commissioned by Governor Cooper by Executive Order number 113 on December the 9th, 2019, with 34 members, a very diverse representation of membership. We have representatives from our K-12 schools. This includes classroom teachers. This includes principals. This includes superintendents. We have representation from our public and private institutions of higher education throughout the state of North Carolina. We have representation from Health and Human Services. We have representation from the corporate and business sector. We have policymakers and lawmakers serving on this commission. We're supported by the Hunt Institute, and we're very thankful to Dr. Siddiqui and Allison Goff and Cal Canet, who continue to do great work to support the Drive Task Force. We also have direct connection to the governor's office through Ms. Latanya Patillo, who keeps me in order and does a great job advancing and moving the work of this task force. But the goal, the collective agenda, is to advise the office of the governor on strategies that would address matters of equity and inclusion within education for the state of North Carolina. To that end, we've been asked to produce a plan. This is our key deliverable. This plan must be submitted to the governor by January 1st of 2021. So we've been hard at work since May. So a very truncated period of time to do a great deal of work. But the 34 members of the task force have been highly engaged and participatory, and we've been hard at work. This plan must include the following 5 elements. Number 1, we must assess the state's progress toward increasing K-12 public school educator diversity. Number 2, we must identify short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies that will increase educator diversity. Number 3, we have to identify assets that will aid with the recruiting, retaining, and supporting of educators of color. Fourth, we have to propose metrics and standards that will evaluate the success of those aforementioned areas. And finally, we have to prioritize the recommendations for increasing educator diversity. So given these key deliverables and given the work that we've been asked to conduct, we focused intentionally on the continuum, looking at how we go about recruiting candidates of color to enter the various pathways that will lead to licensure and employment as a K-12 teacher, but also recruitment of teachers of color directly into the profession. We focused on the preparation of candidates of color via the traditional pathways to licensure, as well as the alternative pathways to licensure. And finally, we continue to focus on support and retention of our teachers of color in our K-12 schools. As the chairperson, one of the things that I have emphasized and continue to emphasize is we want the recommendations and this plan that goes to the governor to really dig deep. We don't want superficial recommendations. We really want to explore and have wanted to explore the root cause analysis of some of the issues facing the barriers that we continue to encounter in this space. The conversation you all just had about licensure from out of state, that reciprocity process, running into the wall multiple times and not eventually trying something differently. Well, that same adage holds true with the work that we're doing here. So the root cause analysis, thinking about sustainable systemic change, but also recommending aspirational, feasible, actionable, and measurable strategies so we can be certain that the work of this task force does not become an item on someone's shelf and the work does not advance. So the task force has engaged in a methodology over the last 6 months that's been fairly aggressive. We have had 4 task force full body meetings, and the 5th one is forthcoming on next Monday. These meetings have been about 2.5 hours in length for each one. In each of these meetings, we've invited state and national resource experts to provide us with evidence-based promising practice, things that are occurring in other states that we need to give consideration based on that continuum that I shared with you earlier. We've broken ourselves into subcommittees being led by executive committee members. These are 9 members of the task force. Each of these members serve as leadership over the 3 subcommittees that we have in place: the recruitment subcommittee, the preparation subcommittee, and the support and retention subcommittee. And each of these subcommittees have very explicit goals, things that we wanted to achieve over the 6 or 7 month period that we were together. All of this information rolling back up then to the larger task force. We have been engaged in ongoing analysis of data across the continuum of recruitment, preparation, support, and retention. And we've been very intentional to ensure that we're engaging different people and audiences and entities across the state, wanting to hear their perspectives, their ideas, their thoughts, and their concerns. So we've engaged in multiple focus groups with teachers of color, with K-12 human resource representatives, with North Carolina policymakers, with representatives from our educator preparation programs and our institutions of higher education, business and corporate entities, and so forth. Given this work, we will be making recommendations to the governor, and those recommendations will fit in the categories of recruitment. There will be preparation recommendations, and there will be retention recommendations. We also will have a number of strategies. So the way to think about these recommendations, the recommendations will be the goals, if you will. And to achieve each of these goals, there will be strategies that are set up as short-term strategies, things that we should be doing in the next 1 to 2 years via implementation. There will be midterm strategies, things that we should be doing in the next 2 to 5 years via strategic implementation, and long-term strategies, things that we should be doing in the next 5 to 7 or 5 to 10 years via implementation and execution. In the final analysis, some of the performance indicators that we will pay attention to with the expressed outcome of diversifying our teacher workforce is thinking about ways to diversify our EPP pathways. How do we get more people of color into these traditional and alternative pathways? How are we ensuring that we are seeing more people of color by cohort completing these EPP pathway programs? How are we improving the licensure outcomes of our candidates of color? And what are we doing to retain and support the teachers of color that we have and increasing the rate by which we do so? So we are engaged in and have been engaged in a great deal of work in a very short period of time, but I've been fortunate to work alongside 33 individuals, counting me as 34, who are committed to this work, who are committed to improving what we do in the state of North Carolina and how we go about ensuring that we are providing a sound basic education for all students, but with a lens on our students of color with the desire to diversify the teacher workforce. That's what we've been up to, and we hope that you will partner and continue to work with us and be synergistic in our efforts once we release these recommendations and strategies on next Monday, December the 7th. At this time, I will pause and I will entertain any questions that you may have.
Dr. Graham, want to take a moment to say thank you. This was an incredible synopsis of what appears to be a robust, rigorous, and very intentional approach toward this work, and grateful that we embarked on it, and even more to have present to us on it. With that being said, board members, certainly would like for you all to take this opportunity to direct any questions you might have about the overview of the DRIVE Task Force work to Dr. Graham.
Mr. Ford.
Mr. Hall, yes.
Thank you, sir. I just have a comment. I just want to thank Dr. Graham for his leadership with his DRIVE Task Force. It has not been easy to have 34 members to work with, but Dr. Graham, you've done an excellent job in your leadership role and putting this topic up front and having the recommendations ready for January. I look forward to the meeting on Monday, but again, I just want to thank you for it. Ties directly back to what we were talking about. Licensure is an issue, and we have to deal with that. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your comments on bringing forth some recommendations next month that the board can deal with. But thank you, Dr. Graham.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Ford?
Yes, indeed, Ms. Cammons.
I'd just like to express my incredible excitement about the powerful connections that we're hearing between the work of the DRIVE Task Force, our own guiding principles and our strategic plan, and what I know is coming forward next month from the Human Capital Roundtable group. The connection is so powerful, and it just makes me really optimistic that we are going to really have an impact as we move forward with all these different strands.
Dr. Graham?
Yes.
This is Keisha Clemens. I just wanted to follow up. There's something in chat, but I wanted just to say thank you for this presentation, and the data is really powerful, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the research that is definitely supports everything that you showed us. I just was curious, I know that the focus is the teaching workforce. However, I know that as we look at, I was just curious if there were any conversations about the impact of principals and superintendents, and knowing that the discrepancies in the lack or the underrepresentation, I guess, of leaders of color and their impact on the recruitment and retention of teachers of color.
Yes, great question. There's been a lot of conversation in that space. And while you're correct, we wanted to keep our focus primarily in the space of our K-12 teachers of color in the classroom. We also have attempted to deal with, based on the work we've done, this notion of how do we ensure that we're also thinking about the discrepancies between our principals and superintendents of color. So what are we doing to ensure that at the same time, we're giving some consideration to that space? So there's been conversation, and there will be, barring any significant changes to where we stand with our recommendations and strategies today, a nod to addressing some of those discrepancies in our report.
Mr. Ford, this is Olivia.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much. And to Dr. Graham, thank you so much for extending the opportunity for me to engage with a few members. I think it was the executive committee of Drive yesterday afternoon. It was invigorating, and the questions and the discussions reverberated most of the afternoon after post our discussion on the phone and through the evening. So it was very provocative, and I think that's important that we constantly engage in these conversations because it makes us continue to think deeply. I would like to go back to raise a question that you brought forward in one of your slides, your data slides on the Teaching Fellows Program and the low percentage of candidates of color, students of color going into the Teaching Fellows Program. Has Drive explored some of the reasoning behind that?
We have had conversations about it, yes, ma'am. And we believe that when we share the recommendations and strategies, we're going to attempt to get at some of what we believe as a root cause analysis to the issue that might help bolster what happens in the Teaching Fellows Program from a racial diversity standpoint. So we have explored it, we have examined it, we have thought about it, and we hope that our recommendations and strategies will address some of those concerns.
Okay, and thank you very much. And I would imagine, I don't know whether you would see those strategies as maybe more immediate than midpoint. I really don't know. I think it's interesting the way you have graduated out your thinking on these, on your strategies.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Dr. Oxendine. Board members, are there any other questions or comments for Dr. Graham regarding the Drive Task Force? Hearing none, Dr. Graham, let me just say, I think I speak for all my colleagues when I say we sit in eager anticipation to see the full scope of the recommendations. I echo the comments of my co-chair on the strategic committee in saying that, you know, there's obviously lots of intersection and overlap between our work. And so that is encouraging. If I could lob you just a bit of a softball question here just for us to exit out on.
Sure.
You know, you provided a whole bunch of work for us, but for listeners maybe who, you know, are still processing the necessity for concentrating on the racial and ethnic makeup of our teacher workforce, as a bumper sticker, could you just kind of summarize why this work is so important for the state of North Carolina?
It's important because if we want different outcomes, we have to do different things. If we want to disrupt status quo, we have to be willing to try something differently. And the great takeaway is the slide that I shared about teachers of color and the significant impact. And I want to emphasize the word significant, the significant impact that teachers of color have on all students. We oftentimes relegate the impact of teachers of color to the impact that they have on students of color. And even in that space, we relegate it to, it's nice that they serve as models of professionals, but it's deeper than that. Teachers of color have significant impact on all students beyond just being a live model in the classroom, but they move learning gains in reading, in math, in social studies, so on and so forth. These individuals help move the state forward because they're addressing the learning outcomes of our young people who will become productive citizens in our state of North Carolina, who will also be taxpayers. So if we really want to move the state of North Carolina forward from an economic development standpoint, then we have to give greater attention to bringing more teachers of color into the classroom, supporting them while they're there to ensure that they don't leave the profession to go elsewhere or to go to other states who value them a great deal more. That's why it's so significant. That's a long bumper sticker, Mr. Ford, but that's my bumper sticker.
We'll just have to use an incredibly small font. Nevertheless, I thank you, Dr. Graham, for your eloquence, your leadership, and with that, that concludes our strategic planning issue session. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ford. And Dr. Graham, I'd like to add my thanks to you for your leadership on this DRIVE task force, as well as continuing excellent leadership at Winston-Salem State University as Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. We're delighted to be on the same team with you and every member of the 34-member task force, which includes our own Wendell Hall. We appreciate you, Mr. Hall, for bringing our representative on that task force. And to your last point, Dr. Graham, I can speak from personal experience of the lifelong impact of Ms. Queenie T. Bird, my 5th grade teacher at Collinswood Elementary School in Charlotte. And I think of her often as the impact that she had on me, exposing me to different ways of thinking and a better understanding of the life experiences of fellow citizens, those particularly of color. And I think these two items, licensure and this DRIVE task force, are two wonderful examples of how, in order to create a more positive result for all our students, we must think and act differently. And so these are positive developments. Thank you both.
Thank you again.
And now, for the first time, I'm delighted to recognize our Superintendent-Elect, Catherine Truitt, for her initial presentation to the board. Superintendent-Elect Truitt.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and all the members of the board. I am incredibly honored and excited to be with you for just a brief time this morning. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share just a little bit about what's been happening since the election in terms of my transition and these earliest stages of my vision as this vision becomes our vision. First, I would like to echo the chair's words of hope that he expressed at the beginning of the call to order today. We will rebuild public education, and it will be stronger than it was before. And I'm spending a lot of time lately thinking about what that word means in the context of rebuilding. What does it mean that we will be stronger? And for me, at this point, it means that we will be three things. We will be more innovative, we will be more equitable, and we will be more student-centered. And I hope that that today, with these new hires that I'm going to share with you, how I'm building this team out, will be evidence of that desire. I also want to highlight go back to Maureen Stover's story, because I think her story is indicative of the fact that our challenges are about systems, not about people. There are so many amazing people in licensure and across the department, and of course, all stakeholders, all advocacy groups, with plus our teachers and our principals and our superintendents, who are working harder than ever before. And I want to be clear that for me, this is the issues in front of us again are about the systems that are in place that perhaps need to be revisited and changed. Some of these systems, like licensure, have boxed us into an inability to innovate statewide the way we all might like to, and at scale. So with that, I am very excited to share a brief presentation that I have entitled New Beginnings, a Student-Centered Department of Public Instruction. And I hope that you will see over the next few minutes that I am building out a team that is going to position us to be innovative and that will value student, teacher, and parent voice, perhaps in ways that we've not seen for a while. I want to start briefly by letting everyone know that I'm so excited to say that my chief of staff will be Ms. Shelby Armentrout, who will actually be getting married this summer. For those of you who don't know Shelby, Shelby was an intern in the governor's office prior to her graduation from UNC Chapel Hill. She was an intern when I joined the governor's office as his education advisor in 2015. And she was so valuable to the governor's office as an unpaid intern that when she graduated, I hired her to be my assistant. And since that time, she has grown and just proven herself time and time again, first in the governor's office and then at the legislature, and then most recently in an external affairs position for Western Governors University. She is one of the brightest stars that it's ever been my pleasure to work with. She is a graduate of Guilford County Public Schools, and then again, a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. So Shelby will be serving as my chief of staff in what we so far have defined as a very traditional approach to being a chief of staff. So so excited for you all to get to know her and work with her. So I'm very excited to announce that I am creating 3 positions that are going to be direct reports to me. The first one is special advisor to the superintendent for teacher engagement. This position is going to be held by Julie Pittman, who is a former regional teacher of the year, and most recently on loan to No Kid Hungry, where she's been working with Lynn Harvey at DPI to solve for our school nutrition needs, especially throughout the pandemic. Julie brings a wealth of teaching experience. She was a high school English teacher for, I believe, about 20 years. And she will be working in the field, in the trenches with our teachers to discuss all things that come out of legislation that are coming out of the state board in an effort to be in my ears and eyes in our schools. I will also be hiring someone to do this exact same thing with our principals. And that hire will be announced in January and will begin in February. And then third, I think that it's important, given our state's workforce attainment goal with My Future NC, only 50% of our of folks in our state between the ages of 25 and 44 have a post-secondary credential of marketplace value. And so it is crucial that we start building out pathways for our students in high school. And I know firsthand that there is an incredible amount of interest and excitement from our business community about the work that's happening with the state board and the department. And so I'm pleased to announce that Christy Van Alkum will be our liaison to the business community, to My Future NC, community colleges, and philanthropy as we look to strengthen our ties to workforce. These 3 people will create a feedback loop that will inform what's going on at the legislature, as well as what is happening with the State Board of Education. Legislative affairs, I don't have to tell anyone on viewing right now, is an incredibly important part of the work that the department and the board do. And I am pleased to say that Jamie Falconberry has been tapped and has agreed to serve as the legislative director for the Department of Public Instruction. He and Freebird McKinney will be a collaborative team speaking with one voice to the legislature between the state board and the agency. And they will be, as you all know, we head into the long session towards the end of January. They will be working to craft a legislative and budgetary legislative agenda that aligns with the board's strategic plan. And it's very important that folks understand that they are part of this idea of one team speaking with one voice. I'm incredibly honored to share with everyone some new hires that will be serving in deputy positions for the Department of Public Instruction. So, of course, David Stegall will continue in his role as Deputy Superintendent of Innovation, and he is going to be joined by Dr. Robert Taylor, a former superintendent, Regional Superintendent of the Year, and incredible educator with a passion for putting students first. I'm also incredibly excited to announce that we will be creating an Office of Equity that will be led by Dr. Catherine Edmonds, who is currently the superintendent for Elizabeth City Pasquotank Schools. Dr. Edmonds and I worked together at the UNC system when she headed up the Principal Fellows Program. And I really credit Catherine Edmonds with helping me to understand what equity in education means, why it's important, and what we need to do to achieve this equity. I'm also thrilled to announce that prior to the election, Superintendent Johnson had already begun to get the ball rolling to hire Dr. Derek Jordan, who is currently the superintendent of Chatham County Schools, and he will be an assistant superintendent in charge of our agency schools. So our schools for the deaf, Governor Moorhead School for the Blind, the Innovative School District, our lab schools, and alternative schools. I'm incredibly excited to share with everyone that Dr. Bev Emery, the Executive Director of Leandro, and our new Director of Communications, Blair Ellis Rhodes, will be reporting both to the State Board and to the agency in an effort to ensure that, again, with these two important different pieces of all of our work, that we are speaking with one voice between the State Board and the agency. Along those lines, I want to share that I could not be more pleased with the support that I've received from Chairs Davis and Duncan, and that the board has been incredibly supportive in helping me have a successful transition, and everyone at the department as well. I just cannot thank you enough for bringing me into the fold and for supporting the changes that I would like to make, and would just love to assure everyone that we intend to speak with one voice moving forward, and that there will be a renewed commitment to, again, valuing student voice, parent choice, and especially educator voice. And with that, I will stop and thank everyone for their attention and their time. Special thanks to the chairs and the board, and to especially to David Stegall and Bev Emery for spending so much time making sure that I have what I need on behalf of Superintendent Johnson. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you again in January.
Thank you, Superintendent-Elect Truitt. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues. If you have any questions or comments on the vision that Superintendent-Elect Truitt just outlined.
Chair
Mr.
Davis.
Chair.
Yes,
Oh, I believe that was Olivia Oxendine, wasn't it?
It was Jill Camnitz.
Sorry,
That's
Jill.
Well, I just want to say that excitement seems to be my word of the day. And Catherine, I'm so pleased that you're gonna work with us moving forward, and all of these plans that you've just presented to us are just sound great, and I look forward to what we're going to accomplish together over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Ms. Camnitz. I feel the same.
Bristow Smith.
Thank you, Chair Davis. And Ms. Truitt, I just wanted to express our great enthusiasm on behalf of the principals of the state, but very specifically, I also wanted to thank you for the time that you took during the primaries, visiting Edgecombe County, visiting our students from Edgecombe, and spending so much time listening to them. When you say that you value student voice and educator voice, that was evident because you showed up. And we really were so grateful for that. And I'm so enthusiastic about the just the energy and the spirit of optimism and collaboration between the agency and the board. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you. And I have to say that experience that day during the primary season has had a lasting impact on me. And I look forward to sharing more about that when there's an opportunity.
Other comments? Okay, hearing none, Superintendent-Elect Truitt, thanks again for for your vision of innovation, equity, and student-centered. The hallmark of a strong leader is the ability to attract talent. And I think this reflects positively not only on your leadership, but also the attractiveness of working in the Department of Public Instruction, along with the hardworking and dedicated colleagues that are present here today in bettering the education of all of our children across the state. Look forward to your assumption of duties on January 1st, and together doing great things for the students in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now recognize Ms. White, the chair of the Special Committee on School Turnaround and chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Good morning, Chair Davis and fellow board members, all those listening today. I'm Amy White. I do chair the Special Committee on School Turnaround, as well as the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. Joining me on the Committee for School Turnaround is Mr. James Ford. Clearly, Mr. Ford has a lot on his plate, having heard the amazing.
She's muted. Ms. White. Ms. White, we can't hear you. Ms. White.
We are excited about your leadership. We're excited about the spirit of collaboration that you bring, and I look forward to working directly with you, and we pledge our support on your behalf. Today on the Special Committee on School Turnaround, we have two items. A turnaround number one is the action item, which is the December 2019 annual report. We had this presented to us last month. You have had a month to review that. We do have a proposed policy amendment that goes along with this action item today, and Ms. Julie Ann Garber is going to walk you through those steps. Ms. Garber.
Thank you, Ms. White. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, Superintendent-Elect Truitt, and board members. My name is Julie Garber, and I serve as the Reform Model Lead within District and Regional Support. Last month, we did bring to you the state summary of the Restart Model from the December 2019 annual report. So first, we are recommending to you that you approve the state level summary of the December 2019 Restart annual report. The report can be found as attachment number 4 in your documentation. Second, during the summary report, we also included recommendations for your consideration and now are returning with the drafted versions of the documents. The first recommendation involves the restart application. We are suggesting an application window from October through December in order to provide orientation sessions in the spring. As well, we are recommending updating the assurances section of the application to include a 5-year commitment to align with the monitoring cycle. The second recommendation is an update to the DSTR 040 policy to also include a 5-year commitment to align with the 5-year monitoring cycle. After discussion with the committee, there has been a slight adjustment from the phrase 5-year monitoring cycle to change to the phrase the duration of the monitoring cycle due to the impact of COVID-19 and the fact that some schools may actually opt for a 6-year monitoring cycle. So you will see this language in the drafted application and policy. So after review by the legal counsel and the turnaround committee, both the drafted application and the DSTR 040 policy have been provided for your review. Attachment number 1 is the drafted restart application with the additional sentence to the assurances section. This is in red on page 4. And then there is also attachment number 3, which is the drafted addition to the DSTR 040 policy. So with this, I'll pass it back to Ms. White, and I'm available for any questions.
Miss White, we can't hear you.
Technical difficulties.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ms. Garber. Board members, what questions do you have about the proposed policy amendment? Well, I'll take that as an indication that Ms. Garber and her amazing team have presented these things clearly and effectively. As you know, board members, we have been working on this particular amendment and this work for several months now. And so it's great to see in print a clear articulation of exactly how, what, and the details of being a part of our turnaround school program, what that looks like. So again, with no further comments, this will be before you for action tomorrow, and we will move to turnaround number 2, and this is the approval for the actual model to transform and support North Carolina's public schools. We know and recognize that we can't make all the changes as quickly as we would like them to be made, but this is the framework. Again, that we've been working on for months, over 2 years of time, really looking at turning the ship. I got accused of, or not accused, but I coined the phrase, hey, we need to move the needle, and now everybody uses that when we talk about turnaround. But this is our chance to really put structure and form and long-term support for what we're trying to do. So for turnaround 2, we've got Dr. Cynthia Martin, the Director of Division and District and Regional Support, and Dr. Emery. So, Dr. Martin.
Good morning. Welcome, Superintendent-Elect Truitt. Good morning, Superintendent Johnson, Chair Davis, State Board members, and advisors. Last month, I shared our model to transform and support North Carolina schools. We talked about targeting 6 districts and 44 schools. And we also talked about some of the services that would be designed especially for these districts and schools. This slide serves as a summary of our plan. This is the prototype for what is currently missing in our continuum of support for North Carolina schools. The cornerstone of this process is entering into a partnership with districts. Our Leandro Executive Director will share our updated MOA agreement. Dr. Emery?
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and welcome new Superintendent-Elect Truitt. Great to be with all of our board today and Superintendent Johnson. I will be brief here. I just want to acknowledge that our board attorney Zyko and I have worked through this document since you saw it last as a board. Appreciate his reorganizing it so it's easy for us to reference items, and also strengthening the language to mirror some of the Halifax language. And we feel really good about being prepared now to introduce this to the districts that we will be working with. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Again, it gives us some measure of accountability and creates an artifact for our Leandro work. We do, with your approval, plan to send letters of invitation on Friday to the districts and the schools, the districts where these 44 schools are located, to launch this effort. So appreciate your great support and happy to answer questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Emery. So board members, you've had a chance to take a look at this. I have no other word than absolute extreme focus. A galvanization, if you will, of direct and immediate support. And as you know, we're charged with presenting budget requests to the state legislature every year about the how and the why and the what. What do we need in order to operate our schools effectively? So what I'll tell you is this could not be a more clearly articulated explanation of the how and the what and the why. Questions from colleagues?
Ms. White, this is Alan Duncan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Vice Chair Duncan.
So I very much like the plan and really appreciate the wonderful work that's gone into this. So that's my starting point. And of course, like you and others on this board, yearn to make sure we can bring continuity to this and grow it further. One of the things as a budgetary matter, I noticed we're basically allocating the CARES Act funds, which go through 2022 or into 2022, which leaves, two questions from a budgetary standpoint, which by necessity, because of the Biz Op Committee, we've been somewhat focused on that. The first one is, how do we look at starting recurring funds? Because the CARES Act will end, the CARES Act funding will end before we get to the long session in 2023. We need to look at that from a budgeting standpoint and continuity of the work that's being done, number one. A second one is understandably, there's not much flexibility that's left because the budgetary funds look to be pretty much allocated. Yet I know from certain specific districts, low wealth districts and Leandro districts and Leandro impacted schools, there is a need to have some flexibility built in because there are significant needs that arise that we may need to address as we go forward. So I'm saying all this to say thank you for the work that's being done and to start the board's thought process working on how we build some additional flexibility and more requests for more funding into making this work grow and be sustained, which I know is very important to you as you illustrated in your comments before. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan.
Excuse me, Ms. White-Bev.
Yes, Dr. Emery.
If I might just respond, I think the point you make, Vice Chair Duncan, is the reason we have taken so much time to try to be as strategic and surgical in the selection of who. And, using data and partnership with them to get to how and what the supports will be, because we view this CARES Act money as a 2-year lever to demonstrate that this kind of support can have impact. It's not going to be the miracle, but we believe that really the most important aspect of this 2-year window is demonstrating strategy that's value add and will elicit further funding. And so we're right there with you. And I think we also see this work as individualized to each district and each school. It doesn't mean everybody can just go do whatever, obviously, but based on the diagnostic process that we'll use to get there in partnership with them. It's also the reason for the agreement. If districts feel like they are working hard and ready to go and don't want this add-on, we will go to a different district. In this 2-year period, it's really critical that folks want us to be there and are receptive to having our district and school-based coaches involved in partnership with them.
And if I might piggyback on that, if you'll remember, during the allocation of the initial CARES Act funding and the proposal from staff about how the money would be allocated, I had some reservations about allowing monies to go to some positions that would only hear, as Dr. Emery said, that 2-year window. And so for me, it's fantastic to see that this is the springboard. I think Dr. Emery used the word lever. And what I'm hoping is that the critical change and the catalyst for change will be the support that we need to make sure that those positions are sustained long term. Other questions from colleagues? Well, thank you, friends, for your amazing work. Those will be 2 items before us tomorrow from the turnaround committee, and we will, hearing and seeing no other comments, we will close out the work of that committee. And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would love to move straight into education, innovation, and charter schools, if that's okay.
Please do.
Ms. White, we can't hear you again. Ms. White. Ms. White.
We're in switching committees. Ms. Jill Kamnitz is the vice chair for the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, and we just are continually amazed by the work that the staff members that provide support for this committee do day in and day out. We thank them for their work. EICS 1 is the North Carolina Virtual Public School Advisory Council appointments. Board members, you have those before you as an attachment. And so I will just turn that over to Dr. Colbert if she is on the call this morning, or Dr. Murphy, I believe, who is the COO of the North Carolina Virtual Public School, to walk you through those.
Good morning. It's Dr. Mia Murphy. I'm from NCVPS, and good morning to Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, Superintendent-Elect Truitt, and the board. So we come before you today with nominations for our advisory council. We have a slate of phenomenal educators and education advocates to present. State board policy outlines our advisory council membership, and members have 4-year staggered terms, with a quarter of our membership expiring at the end of each calendar year. We are proposing the reappointment of 2 council members, some names very familiar from today. Dr. Robert Taylor, Superintendent of Bladen County Schools, Mr. Lewis McIntyre, who is a retired administrator with Rockingham Community College. So they are our reappointments being proposed. 3 additional new council members are Dr. Valerie Bridges, who is the superintendent of Edgecombe County Schools, Dr. Renee Collins, the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction for Rutherford County Schools, and Mr. Craig Tucker, who is the managing founder of Implement Ed. You have the roster of our council before you, and it also includes the resumes of our reappointments and our new appointments. We seek diversity in all aspects of our membership and are excited about the slate that we have before you. We also realize that with such a talented advisory council, opportunities will arise that may make it so that they can no longer serve. I'm definitely understanding that with the presentations of new staff coming to DPI from Superintendent-Elect Truitt. So we realize that a couple of our existing council members are also coming to DPI to be our colleagues, excited about that, but also said that they will not be able to serve on the council. So with that in mind, if we see where that diversity that we seek to ensure that that regardless of zip code, we're ensuring that kids have opportunity, that balance is there, then we will return with new appointments for consideration. Are there questions about our slate of nominees?
Questions from anyone about the nominees proposed to you today for action on first read?
Just a request for clarification, based on the last thoughts that you were saying, what will we be voting on tomorrow? That is, with the appointment of Dr. Taylor, would that then be removed from the motion?
Yes, Mr. Duncan, because this all happened very quickly and we were not sure. Yes, we will remove Dr. Taylor from the motion to approve.
And then we'll also need to have a replacement for Dr. Jordan from the Piedmont District as well.
We're looking at that to figure out the balance, and so we'll definitely be back with a couple more or slate as we look to see what will be best to ensure that we have a great voice for everyone.
Thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for bringing those forward. Any other questions? Wonderful. All right, let's move to EICS 2. This is a request from Doral Academy, a school that the state board approved their charter school application. They were in their planning year. They were unable to secure land in the original designated location, but have found a short distance away, but it is outside of that 10-mile radius and requires our approval. So Dave Machado is here to walk us through this particular request. Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White. And as Ms. White mentioned earlier, Doral Charter School was going to open. They are currently in their 1-year delay. They were going to locate in the Gardner area of Wake County. They are asking to relocate 10 miles to 7,000 Destiny Drive in Raleigh, which is going towards the Knightdale area. They have secured 59 acres. It has 2 buildings on site already. It's an existing church. So they'll be able to, with very little work, be able to move in this coming August, and it will give them time to build their permanent location on that 59-acre site. The closest traditional public school to this area is Beaver Dam Elementary, which Wake County is reporting at 117% capacity. and their grade span will not change what you have already approved. They will be a K-6 with 875 students when they are built out. They will start year 2, which would be next year, K-3 with 500 students. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from board members?
Ms. White, could I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
Have Ms. Machado, have you had a chance to reach out to the Wake County schools and or the community? Because I realize the elementary school you referred to 117%, but given the number of students there and the number of students who would go to this school, that could change very rapidly to an underutilized the other with the student populations. The total number of students there would not add up to enough to fill up both schools. So have we, given this is a fairly significant change, it's 10 miles away from the originally approved slide, have we done anything to get a better read on whether or not there's any concerns in terms of how it might affect or impact the area where it is now to be located?
No, Mr. Duncan, we have not reached back out to Wake County. That is not our normal process. So we decided to stick with our normal protocol. When there is a relocation within a close proximity, we do not ask for another impact statement. We have not gotten any feedback from the community. We did not solicit any feedback, but normally when neighbors find out about something like this, they're usually on the second call that they make, and we have not heard anything from any of the neighbors either.
Why is the requirement exist for a school relocation of over 5 miles have to come back to the board for approval if there's not some additional input that would come with it? Just, what is the reason for that policy?
I believe that the reason to have to come to the State Board of Ed for approval is to make sure that there's not a change in the demographics that the school is going to reach at their certain location and then move to another location that would be in contrary to their mission or their vision, just to make sure that they are still holding true to their original application, and this relocation would not alter that original mission.
Thanks for the explanation.
Vice Chair Duncan, I'll just also share that this particular school was originally going to be situated in a community where I actually live. And while disappointed that the school was not able to successfully secure land in our area, its new location is still easily accessible and would serve students that live in southern Wake County. I'd also like to mention that the area in which they have secured a very an amazing piece of property is an incredibly high growth area for Wake County. There is a new subdivision with over 3,000. It's already underway. 3,000 homes planned. So incredibly high growth area of Wake County.
Thank you.
Okay, with no other questions on that particular action item, that will be before you tomorrow in the vote. Let's move to discussion. And the first item for discussion is ES3. These are the application recommendations from the Charter School Advisory Board for accelerated applications. And so to present these to us today, we have Mr. Dave Machado. Just a update, five accelerated applications were received for the current cycle, and board members, Mr. Machado will sort of explain that process to you about schools that have chosen the accelerated application process as opposed to the normal process, and then the schools that have been recommended for approval. Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White. Chairman Quigley is actually on the line. He will be presenting this to the state board, and I'll be happy to answer any questions when they're asked. Chairman Quigley.
Thank you, Director Machado and Chair White, board members. Happy to have a few minutes to present these applications to you. I'll give just a brief overview of the acceleration process and then touch on each application, albeit briefly, and then open up for questions. So, as you know, schools that can identify a compelling need as well as a facility, access to a facility that can be turnkeyed and request acceleration are eligible to apply for the acceleration process. And in that process, these schools, if to approve them next month, they would be green lighted to open in August of 2021. So it is a short timeline. We have had some schools go through the accelerated process recently and open successfully. You have 3 schools before you today. Faith Academy in Rowan County, which is a school that, and I'm sure you've read, is opening largely, and their compelling need is in response to an expected, and what was expected at the time of application has become a reality, a closure of 2 schools that are closest to that area in the school district, as well as one in the faith community. Old Mainstream, which you've seen before, you saw last year. I believe this, Dave, is this their 3rd application or 4th application?
I believe it's their 3rd.
Yeah, so their 3rd time. And then School of the Arts for Boys, which is a first-time applicant in Chatham County. And I know you've read about these. We did decline one accelerated application. Also, a point of note is that the Charter School Advisory Board has kind of made a procedural agreement that what we have told applicants is if you're not approved for acceleration, you have to go back and reapply next year. We're not considering moving schools from the accelerated pool and then saying, oh, well, you're not ready for acceleration, but you're ready for, you can go on the regular timeline. So that is one aspect of our process. So the schools do know that the stakes are high. And, clearly by unanimous vote, the board felt comfortable with these 3 applicants that you have before you today.
Board members, I'm sure you have questions.
Ms. White.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, I do have a quick question of Mr. Chair Quigley. With regard to, I took a look at the application for Faith Academy, paying close attention to I think it was the instructional design, curriculum instructional design, with an eye on reading instruction primarily. And also took a look at Old Mainstream Academy. And want to preface all this by saying I read very carefully both applications, and want to say with regard to the Old Mainstream Academy, because it is located practically in my backyard, I want to commend the board of directors and specifically those individuals who worked on revising the application, because it looks really good and really exciting. I noticed some of the major changes in the mission statement, some major changes in the kind of the philosophical direction of the school. The instructional design is pretty innovative. I wish them well. I think it's going to be a very successful school. I would like a little bit of detail, if you would, around the reading program. And I'll take my point, I'll go back to my point with regard to my mentioning Faith Academy. In their application, they were very, very specific. It was almost like I compare it almost like to a lesson plan. There was so much detail around the teaching of reading. And even though Old Main does reference, which I applaud them for doing this, they reference reading, the science of reading in the reading component of the application. Could you talk a little bit more about any additional detail you have around their plan to teach reading?
Yes, ma'am. And I will say that we pressed both schools. I actually pressed Faith as well. I appreciated their level of detail. I think there's a lot of research, as you know, about the importance of grade level text and some of the limitations on a solely readers and writers workshop model. And that was something that we pressed on them as well. So but definitely appreciated the detail that they had there. As pertains to Old Main Stream, one of the things to note is that they are allocating almost 220 minutes to reading instruction. And although I also desired more detail than kind of what you saw, and I saw the same thing, and I think the board saw that as well. Their plan is aligned to the standard course of study, but they weren't specific about, to the level of talking about the type of curriculum that they're going to use to deliver. That came up in the first round interview, and we actually had kind of an extended dialogue with the board members and asking them to kind of give us their pitch. How would you explain your reading program in layman's terms to a parent? Because that's essentially the case that you have to make. It's to the parent and to those people that are making the decision to come to your school. That was something that, frankly, I wasn't satisfied with in the first round. They came back the second round and gave a great and clear description the second round. I don't have that off from memory, and it's not included in the application, but I think they were able to effectively translate what is a very deep and thoughtful application, but needed some kind of basic specificity, kind of as you described, like a lesson plan. We're able to deliver that to us in that second round interview.
Okay, great. I am sure that once the school is moving forward through professional development and just general conversations around reading instruction, and also looking at periodic assessment data in reading, reading instruction will continue to be a priority of those that have worked on the curricular design of the school. Again, I do want to say it is really an exciting proposal, much improved, very strong. I suppose my discussions about reading just goes to my love for reading and knowing so much about the need for closing this seems to be perennial, very stubborn reading achievement gap. Well, across North Carolina, but specifically in Robeson County. So thank you so much for addressing my questions.
Yes, and I would just say, for the board as a whole as well, and you kind of alluded to this, we have seen, I think historically, certainly I have experience, and I think other board members have, particularly those that have been on the board now for, I believe we're at 7 years, some of us, that schools that come back and continue to update the application, improve it, and show that they're committed deeply to delivering on this, it is a proxy for capacity to open the school successfully. I can give some examples, but Hobgood is one that came back. There was a MENA charter is another. And I think schools that kind of have to go through the ringer here for multiple rounds. If your board is not committed, if you don't really want this, it's not gonna happen. And we see that with many schools that we deny, we don't see them again. And so I do think they're kind of the fact that this is round 3 does really say a lot about that board's commitment and their willingness to continue to improve. And what that indicates is that they're going to take the feedback from the charter schools and the feedback that you're giving, and they're going to put that into practice. So I think that's why really one of the big reasons you see the unanimous vote from the Charter School Advisory Board.
No, indeed. I expect great things from the school. Thank you.
Mrs. White, this is Jill Kamnitz.
Ma'am.
I've got a couple of questions actually about each of these 3 schools, if I may just sort of go down the list, if that's okay. Faith Academy, we've heard the compelling need, but since it's based on the fact that 2 schools are closing in the area of the county, I have to question that a little bit, because generally when schools are closing, it means that the student population is shrinking, and Faith Academy is projected to open with 500 students. So any concerns about that?
Yeah, I think the way that we interpreted this is there is an intense love for the local community school, and a real passion of the board to have a school that that is based in that specific community. And also, they are going to naturally, they expect and plan to draw from some of the surrounding counties. So they're not beholden just to pull students from Rowan Salisbury as the local district is. And they are adjacent to some other counties that they're expecting, where they're expecting to pull some students in. But I think a lot of what's driving that is energy around the local school there in Faith, and the desire to maintain a local community school, which as an option for families in that community.
Any idea of how many students are currently enrolled in those schools that are closing?
We asked that that's a great question. We asked that during the interview. I don't have that off the top of my head. Dave or staff may have that. We pressed on this very issue, and we're satisfied after pretty extensive discussion. And we did send them. There was part of the, as you probably saw in the minutes, part of what we weren't super comfortable with at the beginning was, do you just think that this school is going to close? I think essentially in the top, that was one of the reasons why we said, well, we're going to wait till the next interview. Mm-hmm. And it does look like that's absolutely going to happen. It's kind of, I think, I imagine the school district is also watching and seeing what we're doing, and in some ways it makes it easier to close the school if those parents are going to have a local option available to them. But we did press on that, and again felt satisfied with, particularly, this was a very strong board in terms of their community connections, and certainly felt satisfied that this board, with the passion that we saw in the interview, as well as their connection to the community, that they would be able to meet a pretty ambitious enrollment projections. Of course, I believe Faith Elementary 2, or the school that's closing in Faith, is only an elementary school, so they do have additional students that they can pull in the upper grades.
So did I just understand you to say that the system has still not announced that those schools are closing?
No, they did at our last board meeting.
They did
announce their intentions to move forward.
Okay. All right.
They hadn't at the time of the first round interview.
Okay. All right. So if I can move on to Old Mainstream. First question, you mentioned the compelling need for Faith Academy, but you did not mention the compelling need for Old Mainstream or School of Arts for Boys. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we got into the compelling need of, even with their application last year, around a desire to serve the local population in Robeson County and the native, the Indian population there as well, indigenous population. Also, one of the components that I think spoke to our board was the partnership, the innovative partnership with the local university. So there was this board did have an overwhelming number of letters of support, both from the university, which they're going to partnership, University UNC Pembroke, and where the campus will be located on the university, as well as people in the community saying that we need an innovation for the population of students, which Old Mainstream seeks to educate, and those that desire education that is aligned to the standard course of study, but can also integrates place-based education and kind of a focus on the historical context of the indigenous population in the community.
Okay, thank you. And then reading the minutes, Dr. Oxendine touched on the reading program, but there were also some concerns about the exceptional children projections and child nutrition. I assume that those concerns were allayed judging from the vote, but anything you want to say about those?
Yeah, I asked about that in the first meeting and then followed it up in the second. Yes, they changed, they did. And again, so they responded to those questions. They basically asserted that they would be adding additional staff to respond to the EC. I think this was about them under projecting what we know, those of us that are operators know from experience, the percent of students that they're going to have from EC in building a program that will meet that. We felt like their responses demonstrated commitment to respond to that need, regardless of the size and the percentage of the school, and that through the Ready to Open process, which they're working already very well and closely with the Office of Charter Schools, that they'll be able to appropriately staff the school and respond to that need.
Okay. Thank you. And then just quickly, School of Arts for Boys, the compelling need there.
I mean, that is essentially, I think, to us boiled down to one, I just want to say very compelling former superintendent on the board, a current principal on the board, and as well as community members, just a very professional and strong board. I think their focus is on serving a student population that is frankly underserved, and particularly boys and low-income boys of color are, as we know, just behind in our public schools, and it is an urgent need that we need to provide innovative solutions for. And you could argue, I could argue, and from my own lived experience, one of the most compelling needs in education right now is, and I think the combination of that need coupled with something that, frankly, I'm editorializing here, but I would say in a lot of schools, the arts are not something that boys have access to, and particularly students, low-income students. And I think providing something that is not strategically available to this student demographic in a lot of cases, and focusing very much on that demographic, the board felt was very compelling given just how urgent this issue is in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. That was a very compelling definition of the compelling need. Ms. White, I have one more question broadly. If I hate to monopolize, but just one more quick question.
You are not monopolizing. Now is the time to have any board member ask questions about these applications. This is this is staff's responsiveness to your inquiries. So go ahead.
All right, so one more question. If you could just remind me and perhaps the board, if these three are approved in January, there is one more step in the process, and I think they have to be deemed ready to open. Is that correct? And what is the timing of that process, of that next step?
Yes, absolutely. That is a step and one that the board takes very seriously. Dave, do you want to comment on the exact timing?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Camden, for that question. All accelerated applications must go through the RTO planning year sessions that are going on right now. And then upon completion of that, which is usually somewhere around May, you will vote again on the recommendation from the Office of Charter School and the State Board of Ed that they are ready to open, that they have successfully completed their planning year, ready to open process. So you'll see these same schools again, probably in sometime around May to vote up on them again. Okay.
All right, and at that point, though, they would have already opened their admissions process, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
And that's one of the most important indicators that we will use in determining whether or not to greenlight these schools to open in the fall. And we do have that. This is obviously the biggest step is the state board's decision at this juncture, but make no mistake that our board has seen the unfortunate impact. The school is not ready, and I think we would have no hesitation about pumping the brakes and saying you're going to need another year, particularly in the environment that we're currently in. If the data that we're getting from the board and boards indicates in any way that they're not prepared.
Thank you so much for those responses. It's very helpful.
Mrs. White, this is Tony Jackson.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just have two, I guess, clarifying questions for myself. One would be, I'm struggling with understanding the functional definition of innovation. And second, am I to understand that the local school district cannot provide any of these programs that are being recommended, or is that even considered as a part of the compelling need conversation? If you could help me understand those two pieces, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So I think when we talk about innovation, so I guess the first question is, how do we define innovation, Mr. Jackson? Is that kind of?
That's correct. I'm just trying to understand innovation, because I'm listening to the definition, particularly for the conversation around the School of the Arts for Boys Academy. And are we saying that we don't offer arts programs for boys in the local school system? Or I couldn't connect the dots around how is that innovative and how is that not being offered in Chatham County? I didn't make that connection. But then it led me to trying to understand what is the true functional definition of innovation? Because when I look at all of these, I would then say, is the local school district not offering this, and what makes any of these programs or program options innovative or a alternative for what's being offered in the local school district? Just trying to clarify that for my own edification. Thank you.
Yes, I think that innovation, can obviously take a variety of forms, and it doesn't mean that certainly a district is not providing some aspect of the program or that these schools are offering. And certainly districts provide a variety of innovative practices. Schools, public schools, church, I mean, their schools are innovating constantly, and certainly in the current context, it feels like every day we wake up needing to innovate. I think what charter schools provide is an opportunity to have that innovation. You drive everything from the mission down at the school. So while I'm sure there are arts programs for boys in Chatham County. I'm certain there's not a school that's exclusively gender specific with that level of focus. So I think it's kind of taking, in many ways, I think charter schools take aspects of innovation that probably are happening in school districts, but then amplify those and allow them to shape the entire model of the school. That's certainly true. You know, a lot of schools have partnerships with universities. Not many schools. We certainly have the UNC, the lab schools, but not many schools are on the campus of a university with a board that has, you know, faculty members, and how that can shape the entire culture and dynamic of the school. And I think with faith, there's, I would say it's more about the innovation is with that school is, you know, what they're providing is a local neighborhood community school in this case, that the district has made the decision that they will no longer provide. Hopefully that gets at some of what you're asking.
And so as a follow-up, so how then do you ensure that we're not replicating or duplicating something that's available that could in fact be offered in the local district with some additional support, I would say?
Yeah, I think that I would say in general, what charter schools provide is a as I said, kind of something that might be available, but it's done in a way that it shapes the entire program of a school. So lots of schools have science and math programs, and there are sometimes magnet schools that are science and math. But when you visit a school like Triangle Math and Science Academy, which is a school that has a replication application that will likely be coming before you, the way that the math and science is integrated drives and shapes everything that goes on at that school is innovative and is unique, and is frankly not provided by the local school district. And I think ideally what we have in charter schools is an opportunity to have an entire school rather than just one program, kind of centered around an innovative idea. And then one thing that certainly I think we all would like to see more of is collaboration between charters and districts, so then the districts can take some of those ideas back and vice versa.
Ms. White?
Yes, sir.
I also have questions on the three schools, and I'll try to be quick.
Okay.
On the Faith Academy, do we have information about the proposed demographics of the new charter schools? And do we have information about the demographics of the school where the children will be attending that are coming from the two schools that are being closed down?
Dave, I'm going to defer that. I don't, on my notes, the demographic from what I remember of the application, I don't have it up for me right now. That school is going to reflect a general demographic of the kind of it's in. They are going to be operating the weighted lottery as well as transportation and the lunch program. So I don't know off the top of my head the demographic of the school that is being closed. I do think that school is likely to be, based on what I'm remembering, I think it is probably more white and more middle and upper income potentially than the other schools in Rowan Salisbury, from what I remember. But I don't want to say that unequivocally. I also know that Rowan Salisbury is a very diverse district in general. And Faith certainly assured us that is their hope to reflect that.
Chairman Quigley, I do not have the application in front of me either, but they did state what their targeted demographics was going to be, and didn't seem to be an issue with CSAP. And I do know that they intend to apply for the NC Access. So again, as Chairman Quigley said, they will be offering transportation, lunch, and the weighted lottery to make sure that their demographics does meet their goal.
Well, if you could help provide that information before we have final discussions on it, we most appreciate it.
Yes, sir. We can get that for you. Sure can.
So in the application, they state that their target population to at least match the demographic breakdown of Rowan Salisbury, if not exceeding it in terms of diverse racial and ethnic composition. And Rowan Salisbury, so they're saying it's estimated 22% of families in Rowan County with children aged 5 to 17 live below the poverty line. And they have a weighted lottery reserving 22% of their seats for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Are we comparing poverty line to free and reduced lunch for purposes of charter school application?
That's certainly the way that they do. I think what we generally see is charter schools will look at the local district and see, what is the approximate school lunch ratio in the district versus and use that as a projection. We've seen schools do both.
All right. Move on to Old Main Spring. If we could, this was a couple of the questions that were asked referred to this. One of the, I think Mr. Quigley said one of the attractions would be for Old Main to the Native American population, and that caused me to wonder, do we have any input from the local tribal leaders? Do we have any input from the local board? Do we have any input from the new superintendent coming in there? Do we have any input at this point from any of those people or bodies in terms of the charter school and any impact it may have on the Robeson County School?
I don't believe that Robeson County submitted an impact statement this cycle. They did, I believe, in the last application cycle, but I'll defer to Dan on that.
I'm actually checking right now to see if they did submit an impact statement, and I can get right back to you.
Okay, very good. I'll keep going while you're looking, Mr. Machado, if that's all right. My question on the School of the Arts for boys is there any public school unit in Chatham County that is a school for girls?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, I'm not aware of that either. No.
Has there been a legal review indicating that it's satisfactory to have a public school unit paid for with public funding in a district where there's one only for boys, but there's not also one available for girls?
We did have legal review this application in detail. We actually held off the application in its originally scheduled interview round. We pushed it to the next month to give legal time to review and consulted with our attorneys about it, and there were no known issues or recommendations from legal to move them forward.
Would it be possible for board members to be able to see that, just have an opportunity to review that? Because I think it's been reflected in some of the questions that have been asked. Just have a comfort level about that.
Yeah, I'm certain. I mean, I again defer to Dave, but I'm certain that the legal team could provide something over the next month.
All right, last comment, and this is really for broader purpose. I noticed in the Old Main application that it was not proposing to be part of the pension system, but it was proposing to set aside 2% for 401k contribution. What is the standard for that for our school?
Generally, I think I'm now just speaking from personal experience. I've seen and heard from leaders about a range of possibilities. So up to I think kind of a more standard is up to a 5% match. of whatever the employee puts in, and I think it runs the gambit. I honestly cannot remember if we asked them about that specifically, but certainly a good question.
Well, do we have any policy statewide as to what would be an appropriate approach as we receive these applications regularly?
No, no. Generally now, most charter schools are not. It is rare that we see a school opt into the state retirement. Most of them do not, and again, kind of we see a varying percent, usually 3 to 5%, based on my memory of looking at the applications over the years. But it's not normed or required at a certain level.
As my last thoughts, and permit me this observation, at this point, the state retirement contributions have gotten close to 20% on an annual basis.
Yes.
And as I've calculated salary, let's just say it's a salary of $40,000 a year at an old main school, for example. 2% of that, on my quick math, is $800. Let's say the school is successful and lasts for 30 years. That would mean there was $24,000 total contribution to a retirement fund. And let's just say the market's done pretty well, and I'm not an actuarial, to say that leaves $100,000 after 30 years in a retirement. It would be a typical retirement period for somebody who is a career teacher in our system. It strikes me that that's not how we want to be thinking about looking after our educators long term. That's just a comment that I will offer, and that we ought to give that some greater depth of thought. Given and the percentage difference in terms of what would be contributed in Old Main versus what in this instance, the public schools of Robinson County will be contributing to the retirement. That is the long-term welfare for the benefit of the state and for our educators. It is very, very, very significantly different. So I share those thoughts with the last comment. So thank you for letting me do that.
Thank you.
And Vice Chair Duncan, this is Dave again. None of the accelerated application LEAs submitted impact statements.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members Kamnitz, Oxendine, and Vice Chair Duncan for the very thoughtful and careful attention to the applications that have been submitted. Are there any other board members who have questions for this team before we close out?
Yeah, Miss White, this is Olivia. I do have just a quick wrap-up question.
Yes, Dr.
And actually, it's a little, I'm asking for clarification because I'm losing connectivity too, I think. I want to make sure that I understood the piece around the EC position that is budgeted in Old Mainstream. Is there going to be an amount of money set aside to hire a full-time EC teacher?
Yes. They provided a subsequent budget that demonstrated that. If Dave could probably confirm that, but I do, if my memory serves me well, I do remember that because that was a very specific request that we made. I believe you're provided the original budget. Schools obviously have the capacity to adjust their budgets after approval. We generally look at that first budget and in their first round, and then they did submit as they were moved forward to the revised round or the second round. They did submit a revised budget. I reflected that, if I remember correctly.
All right, thank you. And then quick follow-up is weighted lottery. Does each school propose a weighted lottery?
I believe they do because I believe all of these schools will be applying for the access grant. So
Yes, every one of these applications did commit to a weighted lottery.
All right, very good. And then slightly to Vice Chair Duncan's point with regard to collaboration, robust collaboration with partners in the communities. I think it's going to be really important that the board of directors of each school, but I want to talk about specifically for a minute about Old Main Stream, does seek a relationship, a partnership relationship with the Lumbee tribe. I'm not sure that there is a letter of support in the application. And I know that would certainly add tremendously to the richness of the school. So I may be wrong. I don't know whether there's a letter or not, but regardless, I just want to emphasize the importance of that partnership with the Lumbee tribe. So thank you, Ms. White, for indulging me.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So board members, on this agenda item, you have lots of supplementary material. You can read the minutes from the meeting. You can read their applications. You'll have a month to review that, and it'll be back before you for approval next month for these particular applications. Let's move on to EICS 4. This is Wake Prep Academy's second delay request. The State Board of Education approved Wake Prep Academy's application, and they are now before us for another request. And let me see, I believe Dave Machado. I'm sorry that my phone is ringing in the background. Dave Machado.
Yes, thank you again, Ms. White. Wake Prep Academy is currently on a 1-year delay. They are asking for a 2nd-year delay, which does take state board approval, and this is the only additional delay that they are allowed to request. Their application is for a K-12 school with 1,600 students. If approved, they would open up in the fall of 2022 if you approve this amendment. Their last 3 years of their charter would be K-12 with 1,600 students. The site plan that they have chosen have an option to purchase and have spent quite a bit of money to get to this point. The site plan was denied by the town of Wake Forest Board of Commissioners. And Wake Prep Academy feels that the reason for denial does warrant an appeal to the Superior Court. So they intend to appeal it to the court. And the earliest that they can get on the docket, they're telling us, is March of 2021. There is no facility large enough for a temporary site, and the Wake Prep Board and their EMO Charter 1 have decided that it just is not sustainable to try to divide this school into 2 or 3 facilities, 2 or 3 sites across the Wake Forest area. So they're asking for a 2nd-year delay so they can get this to Superior Court and then be allowed to build on the property that they have selected. And CSAB did vote unanimously to recommend this to the State Board of Ed. The school currently has 4,000 families on their interest list that represent over 6,000 students. So they have been able to do a good job keeping the interest high with the families that are looking for school choice in this area. And they are confident they can still meet these enrollment numbers. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. White, can I ask a question?
Sure, Vice Chair Duncan.
What happens one of 2 things. What happens if they prevail? Let's say their earliest court date time works in March. Let's say they prevail in that hearing, but it's appealed. The appellate courts would take at least another year to happen that way. Or alternatively, what happens if they don't win on that and they're appealing? Can they continue to ask for year delays, or is this the last year they're allowed to ask for?
This
at some sense what the protocol would be.
The second year delay by statute is the only additional delay that the State Board of Ed can grant. So if you were to give them this second year delay and they go through the court process and either lose it or have to appeal and cannot open in time, then they would have to relinquish that charter and reapply again.
Thank you for that clarification. It's an unusual circumstance, but it's good to understand what the approach is.
We have had several other schools that have asked for 2-year delays, Discovery Charter in Durham being one, because they had a similar issue where the neighbors were protesting the site that they were going to be on, and they were finally able to open after their second delay. So this is not the norm, but it certainly has happened. It's been granted before.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this request for a second delay? Okay, thank you. We'll move to EICS 5. This is a revocation recommendation for S.E. May Kaiser Fox's charter. Board members, you know, it is very few and far between when we actually revoke or make a recommendation, approve a recommendation to revoke a school's charter. So I believe Alex Quigley is with us to discuss this particular charter school's situation.
Yes, thank you, Chair White. Obviously, this is never a decision and a recommendation that we take lightly, but we feel that S.E. May Kaiser Fox has essentially violated one of the core requirements of operating a charter school, and that in order to remain in operation, which is failing to submit an audit over the 2 years of their existence now. We had an extensive conversation with them about the timeline and this and that, but at the end of the day, the audit is how we ensure that they are meeting general and financial requirements as well as other operational requirements of the school. And we are not in a position to evaluate their compliance if we don't have that audit. And just the sheer fact that you haven't produced the audit raises all kinds of questions about the general operation of the school. And I think we need to be very clear that if you do not do these basic things, this is the floor, not the ceiling. And if you're not able to do these basic things, you don't get to maintain your charter.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley, and thank you for the work of the, on behalf of the board, we thank the Charter School Advisory Board for the time and dedication that they give and careful attention in holding feet to the fire. And I appreciate your comment about the floor, not the ceiling, and the strict measures of accountability that apply to charter schools. Board members, questions about this recommendation before us? Okay, I'm not seeing any. These 3 items, EICS 3, EICS 4, and EICS 5 are all discussion items. They will be back in front of us next month at the January meeting. I encourage any board member to please reach out to our Office of Charter Schools if you have particular questions that need to be addressed that you can't find in the materials posted to eBoard. I did want to give the board direction to the consent items that are on our agenda this month. EICS 6 is the annual report from the North Carolina Virtual Public School. You heard that at last month's meeting. And then we have 4 schools who are requesting a weighted lottery, and that's Alpha Academy, American Renaissance School, Lincoln Charter School, and Lakeside Charter Academy. That's EICS 7, 8, 9, and 10 that are all on consent. And these schools, again, are applying for the weighted lottery in order to increase opportunities for our disadvantaged populations to access high quality schools of choice. Those are before us on consent. And Mr. Chair, this concludes the report of both the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee and the School Turnaround Committee. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ms. White. We'll now take a break and return at 1:50. 1:50.